The first time we realize how fragile our sense of security is, it doesn't happen in front of an equation, but in front of a blotch of light. It is small, reddened by expansion, and it seems harmless. Then someone measures it, compares it with models, and that blotch stops being an object. It becomes a question. Because the light we see today is a message that set out when the universe was young, and the farther back we look, the more we enter an era in which every allowed encounter with matter should be rare, slow, almost shy. And yet the deepest infrared observations are showing something that sounds like a contradiction. Galaxies that already appear large when cosmic time should have granted them only childhood. It feels a bit like finding a tree whose growth rings are far too numerous for its apparent age. It is not just aesthetic wonder. It is a physical friction between what we believe and what the light is telling us. The standard cosmological model has a particular strength. It does not arise from a single clue, but from an interweaving. Expansion measured on large scales, the presence of a fossil radiation that fills the sky, the distribution of galaxies, the abundance of light elements. Everything converges on a hot, dense origin, followed by cooling and the expansion of space. At about 380,000 years, the universe ceases to be opaque and allows radiation to travel freely, the radiation we now measure as the cosmic microwave background. That glow is like a photograph of a cosmic newborn, and the overall age we derive from it, together with other measurements, is about 13,800 billion years. Up to this point, the story seems solid. The problem arises when we try to describe the opening chapters in detail. For a long time it was thought that the first stars ignited a few 100 million years after the beginning, and that the first galaxies were small, low mass, intermittent, still incapable of rapidly building enormous quantities of stars. Then Webb arrives, and the depth becomes almost cruel. In the near infrared, the most distant galaxies are not merely fainter dots. They are objects whose color, luminosity, and in some cases spectra suggest distances that place them in a surprisingly early epoch. Some candidates seem to exist already when the universe was less than 1 billion years old, and in extreme cases even much less. And the truly destabilizing thing is not only the distance. It is the estimated stellar mass, which in some analyses reaches values comparable to those of mature galaxies. How can so much matter turn into stars so early? How can a structure grow, organize, stabilize, and shine like a fully formed organism, when the predicted assembly times should be slower? Here a truth that is often forgotten comes into play. Converting light into mass is an interpretive act. A galaxy's luminosity depends on the age of its stars, on the presence of dust that absorbs and re-emits radiation, on the amount of ionized gas that produces very intense emission lines, and even on the distribution of stellar masses. That is, how many large stars and how many small stars form. If a young galaxy is dominated by very massive stars, it will appear brighter for the same mass. If emission lines are strong, some photometric filters can record more light than expected and make the object seem larger. If there is dust, we can under or overestimate different components of the signal. It is an exquisitely delicate balance, and shifting a single assumption can move an object from impossible to rare but plausible. And yet, even taking these cautions into account, a hard core remains. Some galaxies really do seem too efficient too early, and the feeling is that the young universe found shortcuts that, in our models, are still written in pencil rather than ink. And it is here that the story becomes more unsettling, because it no longer concerns only the quantity of stars, but the quality of the time they have had available. If we observe a galaxy at an extremely early epoch and its spectrum shows hints of elements heavier than hydrogen and helium, such as oxygen, then the message is twofold. First, it is not enough for stars to form. They must also evolve, and some must already have died, because oxygen is a product of stellar nucleosynthesis and is dispersed into space when massive stars end their lives. Second, this implies a compressed chain of events. Gas collapses, stars are born, stars burn their fuel, explosions or winds enrich the environment, new gas mixes and generates a second stellar generation. All of this within a time window that, on a cosmic scale, is a flash. This is the true vertigo. We are not just seeing large galaxies, we are seeing rapid processes, an accelerated cosmic metabolism. There are explanations that do not require throwing away the entire framework, but do require making it more elastic and, in a sense, more extreme. One possibility is that the first stars were on average more massive than those that form today. Large stars live briefly, but in that brief time they emit enormous amounts of ultraviolet radiation and rapidly enrich the surrounding gas. Another possibility is that, in the densest and luckiest regions, the inflow of gas was continuous, like a river that never runs dry. If large halos of dark matter, invisible but gravitationally dominant, capture gas efficiently and funnel it toward the center, then star formation can occur in bursts, with intense episodes that quickly build a great deal of luminous mass. There is also an even more dramatic candidate. An accreting black hole can make a galaxy appear brighter and alter mass estimates if it is not clearly identified. In that case, the problem does not disappear, it simply changes face, because the question then becomes, how does a black hole already so active form at such a young epoch? As these enigmas grow, Webb has illuminated another chapter that had been waiting for a convincing protagonist for decades: the arrival of light in the universe after the initial opaque phase. After the fossil radiation began to travel freely, the universe passed through a long era in which there were not yet stars and galaxies spread out as we know them. The gas, mostly hydrogen, was largely neutral and easily absorbed more energetic radiation. Then, between a few 100 million and about 1 billion years after the beginning, reionization occurs. Hydrogen is ionized again, space becomes more transparent, and light can propagate more freely. To achieve such a change requires an enormous production of energetic photons. For a long time it was debated whether the work was done by large galaxies, by black holes, or by a multitude of small, hard-to-see sources. Here general relativity offers a trick that seems like magic, but is geometry, gravitational lensing. Clusters of galaxies with their immense mass, curve space and deflect light rays, magnifying and amplifying extremely distant sources that would otherwise be too faint. When this amplification comes into play, dwarf galaxies of the young cosmos become visible, small objects, with few stars compared to a large modern galaxy, but potentially capable of leaving a gigantic imprint on their environment. The idea is simple and ruthless. A single dwarf galaxy cannot reionize the universe, but if the young universe was populated by a vast number of dwarf galaxies, then their collective contribution can become a diffuse cosmic power plant. In some observations, these galaxies show signs of ionizing radiation escaping more efficiently than expected, as if part of the most energetic light really does manage to escape instead of remaining trapped in the local gas. This is a crucial detail, because it is not enough to produce photons. You must also allow them to get out and traverse the intergalactic medium. And so, instead of a single paradox, we find ourselves facing a mosaic of small paradoxes, each of which could be a missing tile. The too large galaxies might be less massive than they seem if emission lines are skewing the photometry. Or they might truly be massive, but formed in exceptionally dense regions, where gas flows and rapid mergers accelerate everything. Early chemistry could be the sign of initial stars that were more massive, capable of enriching the environment in record time. Reionization might be driven not by giants, but by the small ones, which are far more numerous. And amid all this, there is a lesson that the history of science repeats without mercy. It is not the universe that must be convenient for our models. It is our models that must be alive enough to withstand the unexpected. The question, are our models wrong, or is the universe wrong, sounds like a provocation, but in reality it is a false choice. The universe is never wrong, because it does not answer to a program. It is we who, in order to understand, simplify, average, and build general rules. The point is to understand how much room we leave for exceptions. It is possible that the overall picture remains valid, but that the first 600 million years were more turbulent and productive than we had imagined. It is possible that some initial estimates were misled by technical details, and that with deeper spectroscopy and larger samples, many impossible galaxies will become rare galaxies. It is also possible that a hard residue of anomalies remains, resilient enough to force us to revise specific ingredients, such as the efficiency of star formation, the role of dust in the earliest epochs, or the mechanisms of black hole growth. In every scenario, we are not witnessing a sterile crisis, but a creative moment, the one in which measurements drag theory out of its comfort zone. And the most hypnotic thing is that all of this happens without noise. No cosmic thunder, no visible fracture in the sky. Just ancient photons falling onto a detector, one after another, and turning an image into a doubt. Every time we think we have fixed a precise timeline, the cosmos reminds us that nature loves parallel paths. It builds galaxies where we would not have bet. It lights stars when we thought it was too early. It enriches gas with heavy elements at a pace that seems excessive. And, above all, it forces us to separate two ideas that we often confuse: the age of the universe and the pace of its growth. The age can remain the same, while the rhythm of the opening chapters can be faster, more episodic, more extreme. It is not necessary to change the clock to discover that the music was played at a different tempo. If there is a point at which astronomy becomes almost philosophy, it is this: the past of the universe is not a linear chronicle, it is a landscape. There are slow valleys and quiet plains, but also sudden peaks, regions where gravity concentrates matter and ignites processes ahead of schedule. Webb is not just showing distant objects. It is mapping the distribution of precocity, and teaching us that the cosmic dawn may not have been a uniform glow, but a sequence of sudden ignitions, like sparks in a cold gas that, against all expectations, finds a way to burn. If you've made it this far, it means you love curiosity as much as we do. If you enjoyed this journey, leave a like, write a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support what we do. Your presence truly makes a difference. Until the next exploration.